Hello, friends. Welcome once again. This is Orange Weekly, presented by Crouse Health. My name is Brent Axe. We're live here on Twitter. We're live on Syracuse Orange Sports via syracuse.com on YouTube and live on the Syracuse Orange basketball and football Facebook pages here. We get together Thursdays about 12 noon Eastern time, and we talk some Syracuse sports. How about that? What a concept, huh? And not only is it me talking to you, your questions, your comments, your opinions, put them in the comment section. We'll highlight them as we go here throughout the program. Always enjoy your interaction and getting the chance to hang out with you guys here, and of course on our post-game shows as well. Programming reminder that we'll be right back here on the Syracuse Orange basketball Facebook page. A couple other channels that you're watching on now after Syracuse takes on Virginia Tech Saturday night. Something we'll certainly be discussing throughout the show, but some lingering thoughts from North Carolina Tuesday night, certainly still on the minds of many in Orange Nation, wherever you are. So we will certainly discuss that. There's we turned the football page on as well, because we still have some football going here. We got a signing day coming up just under a week from now, as a matter of fact. And I feel like even though Dino Babers has lost some coaches from his staff, the number of coaches you would lose normally if the head coach was different, I think they've made some good hires this week. So credit where due on the football front. Anything else you want to bring up, certainly can do so as well. And great to be back with you here on Orange Weekly. Greg leading off with us today. Any commits for football? Not that I've seen anything different, Greg. It's going to be interesting to see what kind of approach they take, because the portal window is closed for now. Another portal window will open up in May. So do they just kind of lay off recruits, go more into the portal? They've got what they need for 2023. They reacted to Lenora Sellers by dipping into the portal. We haven't got any commitments from that front, but it's been pretty quiet on the recruiting front. Not to say some things could pick up and this team could start making some noise in the next week or so in terms of people they're targeting and commitments, but it just feels like that first signing day is signing day now. Right? This is the traditional signing day coming up here on February 1st. Let's see, is that Wednesday, February 1st? Usually the first Wednesday in February is when they do signing day. So we'll see what's coming up that way. And Greg switches it around to basketball. There's no commits for basketball because I think it's tough to recruit with a couple of things. You got a lot of young players that are going to be back on this team next year. Now, there's the natural attrition. A couple of guys are going in the portal. It's just the way it's been going in college sports the past couple of years. I wouldn't even want to speculate. Benny Williams comes to mind maybe if this keeps up, right? And you got a couple guys that could go to the draft early. I don't think Judah Mintz should go to the draft early, but there's some talk that, he's capable of it. I'm talking to some NBA scouts and some people about that. Stay tuned on that. Uncle Brent's going to be writing about that pretty soon. But I think it's because of this roster, it's pretty stocked. Whereas last year, you kind of knew, all right, we're going to lose 5 or 6 guys. We better stock that up here. Now, it's interesting you bring up recruiting, because Elijah Moore sitting courtside in the Adam Weitzman Spike Lee seats behind Jim Boeheim the other night. The world of name, image, and likeness has been incredible. If you guys did not read Chris Carlson's story, I cannot encourage you enough. It's one of the best things I've written on our I've read. Not I wish I wrote it. Right? It's one of the best things I've read on our website, frankly, in a long time. Chris just really laid out Weitzman, NIL, the world we're in today. Talking to Weitzman, just fact-based, good reporting. Really enjoyed that story, and I hope you guys got a chance to see that as well. But, Elijah Moore's class of 2024, a lot of the guys they're targeting class of 2024. I saw one of those players they're going after could reclassify for 2023. I think that's really interesting, though, that they have 0 commits. I mean, just by natural attrition, transfer portal, NBA draft, things of that nature, like you can't have no recruits, right? You can't have nobody coming in. So it's going to be fascinating to see how it goes on the basketball front, man, on that front there. Paul says, I was wondering if anything could be done about the poor officiating. Does the league ever look into anything like what happened the other night? Paul, I'm glad you brought this up, because this is my main frustration with what we saw the other night. Roger Ayers and that crew, the free throw disparity. North Carolina takes 23 free throws. Syracuse takes 3. in the prior game, now it's not the same staff, but in the prior game, North Carolina plays NC State 39-12 is the free throw disparity. What is done about that? Because after a loss, Jim Boeheim's got to come to the podium and explain himself. The players are available. You never talk to the refs. They're never held accountable. They're never held accountable publicly. The league never says anything. And that was just, it was just an officiating injustice is what it was, what we saw Tuesday night. And I hate when officials affect the game that much. Syracuse and North Carolina, as we talked about on the postgame show, managed to play a great back and forth game despite those refs constantly getting in the way, going into the little monitor. And you cannot tell me that a team that had 38 points in the paint, that has Judah Mintz driving into the paint, that has Jesse Edwards in the paint, that was in the paint and scores 38 points in the paint, goes to the free throw line 3 times, and you're calling that game fair and square. That was absurd. And I wish I could answer your question, Paul, because we never hear anything from the league. The only time the league ever responds publicly is if there's some call that's so egregious and is replayed 100 times on ESPN and showed on social media, and they basically get shamed into responding to these things. That's the only time they respond. And it's ridiculous that that's the only time they respond. Why can't these officials who are paid professionals that are calling 3-4 games a week, that are out there with the players and the coaches, but we never hear from them. They're never held accountable. I don't get to talk to them, right? Once in a while, an official will be made available to like a pool reporter or something to answer a question, but it's absolutely absurd. And what we saw the other night was absurd. Greg likes it that Jim Boeheim walked out of the press conference. I don't agree with you, Greg. I think that, look, Jim is Jim, and Jim tends to do that, and Jim is walking in a room 10 minutes after a frustrating loss. I get that, but I thought that was a fair question. Maybe he didn't like the tone of the question. Maybe he didn't like the fact that it was a student reporter that asked the question. They're working members of the media like anybody else, and, suck it up. That's what I say, suck it up. You got asked a tough question. You can answer it however you want, but to just walk out of the room like that. I mean, we've seen this for years. I mean, you're 78 years old. You can't answer a reporter's question. I'm not saying you got to tell us what we want to hear. And Jim is very good at being honest and shooting from the hip, and that's what we like about it. But just to walk out of the room is a fair question. This is the second game that Syracuse couldn't close out. This is a problem with this team right now. Judah Mintz, as much as I love watching Judah Mintz play, he can't close games. He's having a lot of trouble in clutch situations. You're trusting a freshman. So maybe you could phrase the question a little bit differently. That's, certainly a topic of discussion. I actually teach a class about this kind of thing up at Syracuse University. So we'll be talking about that in my class coming up on Monday. But the thing about it is, when you look at the situation, like I think a better question would have been, why do you trust Judah Mintz in clutch situations when you have seniors like Joe Girard, when you have other players that can do what he does, right? Because he's not coming through in these situations, unfortunately. And we're kind of seeing the education of Judah Mintz before our very eyes as a player. And again, as I've said many times here on the radio, here in Central New York, on Twitter, there's so much about Judah Mintz's game that I love. But he is not, I think, earned just automatically give me the ball in these late game situations. He had 17 points in that game. He otherwise played well. There's a lot about Judah Mintz's game that I really like. But in that spot, I don't think he should be the one. And of course, it turns into the call. I think it certainly was a foul in some sense. I think RJ Davis leaned into. So, Judah, after the game, he was trying to do the Euro move, the kind of switch over. And RJ Davis, you can clearly see, leaned into it, right? And, I think some of the problem to take some of the heat off the officials is they have so much they have to look out for. There's been so many things that have been added to replay, and they just got a lot on their mind, and they just defer to replay now. If they don't know what they saw, if that makes any sense, we'll just go over the little TV and look at it over there. But to upgrade that to a flagrant one was beyond the pale. That would be like, that's me getting jaywalking, right? Jaywalking is technically in the codes, if you will. And if a police officer sees me committing jaywalking, yes, he can give me a ticket for jaywalking. But why in that spot? You want to call a foul. But to upgrade that to a flagrant one in that spot was completely unnecessary. And that's where I think the accountability of the officials is a topic for discussion, right? You get a little gold star from the ACC because you called a flagrant one in that spot, right? Get to go back. I made the comparison earlier this week. It's kind of like, you know, if you watch The Simpsons, it's like Flanders, you know, kissing butt to Mr. Burns in The Simpsons. That's what Roger Ayers and that crew was doing. Oh, look what we did. Gold stars. We called the flagrant one. You did not have to call a flagrant one in that situation, right? What's going to happen? And that's the thing. I don't know what the accountability is when they don't make the calls that they need to make, right? So that's one thing. Let's hope it doesn't happen again. But the problem is, you know, guys, I'm sure you're watching college basketball like I am. Night in and night out. I see this everywhere in the league. Let's just stick with the ACC. I don't even want to get into what other leagues are doing right now. But Pat Forty had a great way to describe this. He calls it monitor madness, right? These refs that just have to go to the replay every time. They don't know what they're seeing. You got 3 refs out there, and they still don't know what they're calling. They're anticipating a lot of calls. I think that happened to Jesse Edwards a lot in that game. And I understand that North Carolina plays a certain style of ball. They lead the ACC in fouls called per game. They draw 24 fouls a game, but you can't be affected by that as an official. Call what you see. It's why I hate that our shout out to Pat Driscoll, local Central New York official, Bishop Luddenham, where I went to high school. I wish he could do more Syracuse games because he's great, because that's what Pat Driscoll does. Pat Driscoll is one of the best officials in the sport for a reason. He calls what he sees. He calls the game. He doesn't have bias. He doesn't anticipate calls. I mean, he's not perfect, but nobody is. I just wish he could do more games. And Pat would not be biased calling a Syracuse game. That's why he doesn't call a lot of Syracuse games, because you try and keep conflicts of interest out of mind there. But I don't know that it's 2 days later and I'm still ticked about that. And I'm ticked because it took away the players deciding the game. It was a complete imbalance that was just absolutely ridiculous to see one team go to the free throw line 23 times and the other go to the free throw line 3 times. As Paul notes here, especially when 3 calls against Jesse hurt, even the ESPN announcers talked about it. Paul, not only did the ESPN announcers talk about it, I was so glad that Debbie Antonelli was on that call. She's awesome. I love Debbie Antonelli. You know, Doris Burke used to do games, and she doesn't do a lot of college games anymore, and rightfully shows she's been elevated to the NBA. She played college basketball. She can relate. She can see what's happening. Same thing with Debbie Antonelli. She's awesome. And she was just the first charge on Judah with about 5 minutes to go. You brought up the calls on Jesse. His second, third, and fourth fouls were just stupid. But the first charge on Judah, when there's about 5 minutes to go, even Debbie Antonelli had a hard time kind of hiding her disgust in that call, right? It was an anticipated call. It was the wrong call. And Jeff makes a great point here. When Doug Gottlieb calls you out, you know it's legit. I don't know if you guys saw that. I don't want to put the tweet in the chat here because there's a naughty word in it. But when Doug Gottlieb is calling out the refs, dropping F-bombs and agreeing with Syracuse, you know, I mean, didn't they upgrade that doomsday clock? Aren't we like 90 seconds from midnight now? When Doug Gottlieb is on Syracuse's side, you know, A, how bad it was, and B, like, you know, what in the world's happening here, right? Dogs and cats living together, mass hysteria. But Jeff makes a great point there. Even when Gottlieb is calling you out, and this is an advantage for North Carolina. And I don't want to take away anything from Carolina. That's an experienced team, went to the championship game last year, great players. Armando Bacot is right there at the front of the line for ACC Player of the Year. Leaky Black's a great defender. I mean, Gerard shook him out of his shoes on that three-pointer about minute 23 to go. That was a big shot for Syracuse. And you credit to who they are and what they are. But to have that built-in advantage every game you play is, I mean, good for them. At least they got that going for them, which is nice. So the Orange take a step forward. They will play Virginia Tech on Saturday, and this time it's in Blacksburg. It's a quad one game. So how Syracuse responds to some things beyond their control, but a couple that were. Look, we talked about Judah. Joe Girard made a boneheaded play at the end of that game, trying to save the ball going. You don't go after a ball like that under your own basket. You just don't do it, or an opponent's basket for that matter. If, you know, that you have the lead, that spot, just don't do it, right? I talked to Joe about this today, so you'll hear that little tease, little plug. I don't want to give it away, but I talked to Joe weekly on the radio, so that'll be out later today. If you want to listen to it, we're going to play that interview. I want to say about 4:30 this afternoon Eastern time, if you guys want to check that out. But I'll say this: Joe was very accountable for it. Joe knew it was a bad play. He felt bad about it, right? But that's costly, right? So Syracuse had their own problems in that game, for sure. Virginia Tech, how you bounce back and play this team on the road, and you got a tough weekend coming up. 2 in 3 games, 1 on the road, 1 at the Dome on Monday, both quad 1 games, both teams you've seen already. Now, Syracuse beat Virginia Tech, and the reason they beat Virginia Tech at the Dome a couple of weeks ago is the formula that Syracuse really needs to be successful. They shot well from the three-point line. They stopped Virginia Tech at the three-point line. Virginia Tech was 3 of 19 from three-point range in that game. The other big key for Syracuse right now is they've got to eliminate the slow starts, or at the very least, try and cut out as much as possible the slow starts. Even the North Carolina game, as much as Syracuse got back into that game in the second half, took the lead a couple of times, they dug themselves a 9-point hole, just as they've done in almost every ACC game they played this year. Virginia Tech, they did not. And look at the results. And I'm not saying if you don't start slow, that automatically equals a win, but that's been a main ingredient in the struggles that Syracuse has had this year. So if they can take a little bit of that and bring it to the second game, they'll be fine. But Blacksburg, tough place to play. What you hear about Virginia Tech a lot is they're not as bad as their record. They've lost some games in the ACC they shouldn't have, but they're a tough team, a grinding team. Look, they're going to shoot better, one would guess, than 3 from 19 from three-point range. I think Syracuse had something to do with that and the way they played defense in that game. And they're going to want to bounce back with a win against a team they know how to play. And then you got Virginia coming in on Monday night. Virginia's Virginia. They're one of the best teams in the league. The pack line defense. You know who they have. Familiar names, familiar matchups. Tony Bennett has absolutely owned this series. He's owned Boeheim. He's owned Syracuse. Syracuse can't beat this team. They beat them when it mattered in the Sweet 16 a few years back for sure. Or was that the Elite Eight, right? In the tournament a couple of years back, Malachi Richardson, woo! Give me the goggles, right? That's going to be the screenshot of this video, by the way. When I go in later and have to edit this video, there's always like a screenshot. It's going to be that one right there, but whatever. It's at home though. And see, here's the problem. Syracuse got behind 23 points against Virginia. They lost that game 73-66. They at least made it respectable. The problem is you were down by 23 points, right? So I don't know what it is. Maybe it's feed Jesse. Maybe it's take what the defense gives you. It's not an effort thing. It's just they don't start well. I don't know what it is. Jim Boeheim kind of brushed that off earlier this week, which, again, Jim's Jim. He's going to do what he does, but that's an issue with this team. And it's not like Jim's going to reveal the secret. Like, oh, yes, we figured that out. Here's the problem. Here's how we're going to address it. You don't want to give anything to Virginia Tech and Virginia to use against you. I understand the strategy part of it. But I think there's real opportunity here, right? Because these 3 games, Carolina, Virginia Tech, Virginia, obviously Carolina's a loss. But I said going into this 3-game stretch, you can get 2 out of 3. That's huge. Because I feel like I'm a broken record here, but we got to keep noting it, guys. We're about to cross into February. Joe Lenardi is going to be a part of our lives a heck of a lot more over the next month. We're going to start hearing about bubbles and brackets and quad 1 and quad 2 and more tournament talk than you can handle. And Syracuse still has only 1 win of note, and it's Virginia Tech, as a matter of fact. Carolina was an opportunity. Miami was an opportunity. They just have not picked up any quality wins. And they've got plenty left on the schedule. I believe there's 7 games left now or is it 8? 7 or 8 that qualifies either quad 1 or quad 2. And the next 2 are quad 1 games. So what Syracuse is now, people look at them and they say they fight hard, but they can't win close games. And they haven't made a statement. You got to make a statement. It's who you beat. It's as simple as that. And they haven't beaten anybody except Virginia Tech. So there's a lot of attaboys that this team gets, but when it comes to tangible things you can put on the resume, they have nothing. And we're about to cross into February. So time is not on your side there, but you still have those quad 1 and quad 2 games left on the ACC slate, if you can, I don't know, win 5 of those, just spitballing here, at the very least, you'll gain some attention. And you'll gain some attention at the time of the year, frankly, when the tournament selection committee, the bracketologists, people in college basketball, they're paying attention more. They look at your whole resume one way or the other, but they're human. They have recency bias. If you're winning games now and getting hot and piling up wins that count on your resume, that'll get noticed. So at the very least, a couple more opportunities. But I don't know where it is. I don't know where to draw the line on the schedule, but at some point you're going to reach the point of no return where your only opportunity will be win the ACC tournament. And I think that's a tall task for this team to win the ACC tournament. So we're not there yet, but we're getting closer to it, especially if they drop either the next couple games, certainly, but even one of 2 of the next 2. So you don't want to start dropping must wins on the slate, but it's kind of hard not to think that way considering where your resume's at. Okay, so that's basketball. You guys can keep talking some hoops and ask some questions about hoops. We won't ignore that. But I have to say, credit where it's due. Switching to football a little bit here, because I wrote a column earlier this week about the football team, about the coaching staff. This team has lost 5 assistants since the end of the season, right? Just over a month ago, I did a chat right here on syracuse.com, on our YouTube channel, on Facebook, and other places about all things Syracuse sports with John Wildhack, the athletic director. And in that conversation, he used the word stability when talking about the coaching staff. Now, to be fair to John, he even said in that conversation, that's as we stand today. You know as well as I do, Brent, that college sports can change in an instant. This was on December 2nd. Here we are, January 26th. It changed big time because Tony White left and Nick Monroe left and Robert and I left and a couple other coaches have left this coaching staff. 5 or 6 coaches losing, and in the case of Syracuse, it's 5, are leaving, I should say. That's usually when there's a head coaching change. Okay, Georgia Tech is 6 new assistants because they have a new coach. Now, they kept Brent Pry around, who's their he was their interim coach after Jeff Collins got fired. Great name, by the way. He even brought in 6 new assistants. Louisville cleaned house, so you would expect an entire new staff there, I think, with the exception of 2 people. They kept a couple guys on that staff. Virginia made a couple of changes. Dabo Swinney at Clemson made a couple of changes on the staff. North Carolina brought in a new offensive coordinator. I believe Duke brought in a new defensive coordinator. So coaches come and go. That's just part of life. But 5 coaches, that raises a little bit of a red flag. Is that a concern because Dino Babers was not given a contract extension beyond what we think his contract expires to in 2024, right? Coaches know they live in an unstable world, in the world of college coaching, but they try to find stability within that. You know, Robert and I got a 3-year deal at NC State. Dave Doran's not going anywhere anytime soon. You had a coach go to Wake Forest. The cornerbacks coach for Syracuse, Chip West, goes to Wake Forest. Dave Clawson's not going anywhere anytime soon. They've made 8 straight bowl games. Nick Monroe got passed over for the defensive coordinator job. Now, he got a gig in Minnesota where he's from, his heartstrings. His dad used to coach at Minnesota, but he's had other offers and other opportunities that he turned down, and told our Emily Liker at syracuse.com, he admitted that the co-defensive coordinator position was intriguing to him, which he was not offered here. You want to bring in Rocky Long to keep the 3-3-5 defense going. I completely understand that. I thought that was a good move on Dino's part, but why not give Nick Monroe co-defensive coordinator? I mean, Rocky Long's 72 years old. I mean, the guy's in great shape and he's still sharp as a tack. I'm not playing ageism here, but how long is that guy going to coach, right? So coaches see the writing on the wall. Coaches know. Let's be fair here, though. I think that Dino's made a couple of great hires this week. The first one being a former Rutgers assistant, Nunzio Campanelli, to coach tight ends. And you know how I feel about throwing to the tight end more at Syracuse. I know Arondé Gatson essentially filled that role last year, but I don't look at him as a tight end. That's, he's some kind of hybrid. He's more of a receiver than a tight end. But the big thing with Nunzio is he is a big figure in New Jersey recruiting. We brought up recruiting a minute ago for basketball. He is a former Rutgers assistant. He knows all the coaches in New Jersey, and that's a huge recruiting ground for Syracuse. right? That's huge for Syracuse to get those relationships back. New Jersey is a tricky state to recruit in for that reason, right? Paul Pasqualoni, George DeLeon, going a little old school here. Those coaches love those guys, and they just were fed all the great players from New Jersey. Since then, Greg Robinson, Doug Marrone, Scott Schaefer into Dino Babers, it's been mixed, right? Rutgers for a time was built up again. Greg Schiano is back. He, obviously is as well connected as it comes in that state. And it became the thing to go to Rutgers, or let's say Syracuse fell down the pecking order on that list. So now you got Nunzio on the staff who knows all the coaches and can feed you some players. That's why I'm curious to see if anything happens in the next week, particularly from that state, and some players you could either flip or get some commitments from. So I thought that was a great hire for Syracuse earlier this week, right? I also thought that, now let me double check here while we're yapping about this, because I do not believe this has been made official. Sometimes Syracuse is a little slow to confirm these things. You got to dot I's and cross T's and go through human resources, and you can't officially put out certain statements on certain coaches until, like we said, the paperwork's done on this. But, Pete Thamel from ESPN reported that Syracuse brought in a cornerbacks coach who has some very interesting, I'm just looking it up while we're talking about it here, guys. So pardon me for a second. No, they haven't officially announced this yet, but let's see here. I'm just kind of scrolling through something here. Give me a second, ladies and gentlemen. So while I'm looking that up, they also brought in Steve Farmer to take over the offensive line because Mike Schmidt went to Mississippi State. Again, stability, relationships. He knows Zach Arnett at Mississippi State. I mean, Schmidt was only here for a couple of years. I thought he did a great job. I mean, back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons for Sean Tucker, that running game. Matthew Bergeron is at the Senior Bowl, and that offensive line made drastic improvement from the disaster it was, frankly, in the 2019 and 2020 seasons when, poor Tommy DeVito, who had a kick-ass year at Illinois this year, was the most sacked quarterback in college football, right? So I don't know why I can't find this here. There it is. Travis Fisher. So Syracuse, and I just looked, they haven't officially confirmed this, but Travis Fisher comes in from Nebraska to be the cornerbacks coach. When that move crossed, when Pete Thamel tweeted about that, Nebraska fans were like, Syracuse, you're getting a good one. A lot of good feedback there. He sent 9 guys to the National Football League. He played in the National Football League for 9 years for a couple of different teams. So, look, I got to admit here, Dino responded well. Okay, I think Farmer had a tough year at Tulsa last year, but has some real credentials at Texas Tech and some other places. He's been in coaching for 25 years. He was an offensive coordinator for a few years. He knows the position, right? You bring in Rocky Long. Again, I wish they could have held on to Nick Monroe, but if you bring in a guy like Nunzio, who we brought up, who can kind of replace the recruiting aspect of that, Travis Fisher also I shouldn't say allegedly, that's not the right word. He's somebody that's got a reputation of recruiting in Florida. So you got New Jersey covered, you got Florida covered, 2 major states that you got to have, particularly for Syracuse, right? So you lost some coaches, and given the what could be a temporary situation, and given what John Wildhack has said in the non-commitment to give an extension, as long as Syracuse keeps having success, then Dino will still be the coach here. And by the way, I completely agree with that. Okay. I don't think that John Wildhack should have extended Dino's contract. 2 winning seasons in 7 years. That doesn't call for a contract extension. Year 8 is going to be interesting. If Syracuse is either somewhere around where they were this year or builds on it in terms of wins, then maybe we talk contract extension, because that's about as good as it's going to get, frankly, at Syracuse, as sad as that is to say. But if you're making bowl games, you're winning 7-8 games a year, I think that's all you can expect at Syracuse. You got the new structure of the ACC this year. Remember, it's no longer the Atlantic and the Coastal. You're going to have kind of one league meshed in there, so we'll see how that affects Syracuse, but we can talk about that another time. I feel like Dino responded well with the hires that he made. And signing day's coming up in a week. We'll see what that's about. It'll be our first chance to talk to Dino at some point here in the next week or so, just about the process and losing the coaches and who we brought in. He's going to put a positive spin on it, of course, but I felt like they recovered well. I will give credit where it's due there. You lost a bunch of coaches, 5 coaches that's not good. That's a red flag for a team that didn't make a head coaching change, and good for them in one sense in developing this talent that was desired by other places. But I feel like a lot of those coaches, saw the writing on the wall in a sense too, and said, I'd be better off somewhere else given the lack of a commitment to our head coach. And I don't blame them for that, but I think they made some good hires this week. So shout out to Dino on that front. All right. I think that's where we'll wrap up things here for this edition of Orange Weekly. Great to have you back as always, friends. Thanks for your great comments and questions today. Good stuff on that front. Just a programming reminder, we'll be right back here Saturday night. Okay. As Joe notes, I didn't even bring up Tony White, which was one of the biggest losses for this staff as well. And completely agree with you on that front, Joe. Saturday night, Syracuse, Virginia Tech, 7:00 tip. So we will bring you post-game coverage of that on some of the channels you're watching now. If you miss this show, if you miss any of our post-game shows, easy to watch the replay. They automatically archive on the channels you're watching now. We put posts up on syracuse.com. I always embed the YouTube video of the post-game show and my recap on syracuse.com. We put that on our social media channels. So always easy to catch up, but better to be here live so we can talk to you, see your great comments, and answer your questions as we go through the show. Thank you, Joe. We'll see you Saturday night. We'll see you guys Saturday night too, right? Come on back. We'll talk some hoops after the Orange take on Virginia Tech. Have a great rest of your week, everybody. This has been Orange Weekly, presented by Crouse Health.